Maybe one of the biggest bill of goods people have been sold since time began is this monetary system. And I told you it began in Babylon. All it is a streamlined means for financing war. And that's what the king of Babylon wanted. He wanted the money, the wealth of his nation to be at his disposal so that he could wage wars, so he could raise armies. Well, that's what we've got with the Federal Reserve System. It's basically the same damn thing, just modified over the years. You can trace its history back if you want to follow the money. And what I want to do now is I want to show you how they have manipulated money, these banksters, a combination of banker and gangster, over the years. And we'll just start off with recent history, and when I say recent, I mean within the past 100, 200 years. If you're looking at a history span going back 6,000, 7,000 years, then 100 years, 200 years is fairly recent. All right, so J.P. Morgan calls the banking panic of, 1907 that eventually led to the adoption of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve gave them a streamlined means for financing World War I. You can look at that because of the decrease in the hands that held the wealth of this country that took place over the war. From the beginning of World War I, so over 90% of the wealth in this country was in the hands of less than 10% of the population. After World War I, it was something like 90% of the wealth in this country in the hands of less than 2% of the population. And the depressions and the world wars have, since then, have gotten it to where there's a smaller and smaller and smaller percentage of the people holding 99% of the wealth in this country, while we fight over the 1% that's left. Getting screwed, really. So, before the Great Depression, all the major banking interests divested themselves of stocks in the New York Stock Exchange and in the United States. They moved their money to Europe, and they bought gold. Now, this is starting to get like a pre-planned, pre-orchestrated sequence of events that took place over the next, ever since the Great Depression. When Roosevelt went into the White House, he followed the course of action that these bankers told him that you got to do. One was a banking holiday. The second was devaluation of the currency. Well, they devalued the currency from just over $20 to an ounce of gold up to $35 to an ounce of gold. Now, people say the gold and silver and all that are relics of a past, that they don't have anything to do with reality. Well, you could track money supplies, or used to be able to. The Federal Reserve doesn't report money supplies anymore, but you could track the money supplies and the price of gold on the free market, and they floated, and as the money supply increased, the price of gold had the appearance of going up, which was the value of the money going down, not the price of anything going up. That's one of the illusions they feed you, is they tell you inflation. Prices are going up. Prices aren't going up. They maintain stability. What's changing is the value of the money. Its purchasing power is dropping. So they engineered this Great Depression with a margin call on the stock market. This margin call accelerated the people having to sell stocks. Things went into free fall so that they could cover the margins. Everybody was doing business on margin. They still do business on margin. It could happen again. But, they've removed most of the safeguards that were put into effect to keep it from happening. But you wouldn't have those safeguards, or wouldn't have to have those safeguards, if people were honest to start with. But people get greedy. Okay, so the Federal Reserve is their little tool for managing money. And what did the Federal Reserve do? The Federal Reserve increased the monetary supply. And you can go back then, they made reports M1, M2, M3 on the amount of money in circulation, money supply, increase, decrease, all this stuff. And you could check the supply of money. And back then they audited Fort Knox. We knew how much gold was on hand. And you could take the amount of gold that was in Fort Knox, the amount of money that was on demand or available, and what you do is you get that they devalued the U.S. dollar, but they only went put enough money in circulation to take it down to $28 to an ounce of gold. Meanwhile, on the foreign markets, they were redeeming the dollar at $35 an ounce of gold. This had the effect of making everything made in the United States cheaper for everybody else in the world except for the United States. Hey, Japan's doing the same thing with the damn Lexus. They're dumping it in the United States while they're making their citizens pay for pumping the wealth back to their country. The end result of this was that over 90% of the gold and precious metals and all of that ended up in the hands of the United States by World War II. Now, in the meantime, the Federal Reserve gradually increased the monetary supply so that it achieved parity with the price of $35 to an ounce of gold in late 1942. After that, the monetary supply kept increasing, and even based on that limited amount of gold that we did have, because you know the gold is all the gold in the world added together is a finite quantity. All right. After 1942, products were cheaper for the U.S. citizen than the products made in the United States than they were in the rest of the world. The rest of the world had to pay more for anything made in the United States. This reversed the wealth process where it started pumping the wealth out of the United States, and we started living off the wealth that had been accumulated by our ancestors. And this continued with the devaluation of the dollar all the way up till Richard Nixon was in the White House and closed the gold window, because France was going to present more dollars for redemption at the gold window for gold than the U.S. had in gold to pay France. So Nixon shut down the gold window instead of going into default on it. Then he had Kiss-Ass Kissinger go around to all these Arab countries and sign a treaty that they wouldn't sell their oil for anything but the U.S. dollar. This made every nation in the world have to have U.S. dollars to buy oil, hence the term petrodollar. And this is coming to an end, and it's one of the main things we have as far as our propaganda against Iran. Hasn't to do anything with their nuclear weapons or anything like that. Hell, Pakistan has nuclear weapons, and they're a bigger threat than Iran has been. India too. If they get engaged in a war and start launching missiles at each other, it's going to spread. So, well, you know, the thing about Iran, what if they get a nuclear weapon? We've got plenty. What they're trying to do is they're trying to sell their oil for something besides the dollar. This would wreck the petrodollar. If people started selling oil for something besides the dollar, these nations wouldn't need the dollar, and the dollar would no longer be the world reserve currency. There's certain things you need to understand how they work. One of those things is, how does the world reserve currency work? Do a little research, do a little thinking, pull your head out of your ass or out of the sand or wherever you got it buried, and look at what's going on in the world. Thank you.